So here in this video, I would now like to just share a few further distinctions around this idea of shifting perspective. So I hope you found that demonstration in the last clip quite useful, quite insightful, and I'm hoping you're starting to get a bit more confident that this doesn't have to be a complex process, helping people to look at things differently in life. We're only ever one shift in perspective away from completely transforming how we feel about everything, about ourselves, about life, all right? So that last demonstration is a really powerful one. Very, very simple to use, to guide people through, but it can make massive shifts in the way in which people relate to themselves, to life, to other people, circumstances, situations, and so on and so forth. Now, towards the end of the demonstration, I think Karen actually mentioned that her vision started becoming a bit more real. Like she'd been looking at this goal, this vision, this dream, this big picture that she had inside of her mind, kind of like it was over there, and yes, it was becoming a bit more vivid, and she'd moved away from having a void, in a kind of disempowered sense, to actually being the owner of the steps that she needed to take to get away from where she was or is and towards where she fundamentally wants to be. And towards the end of the conversation, when I was asking Karen, so if you were to look at this from yet another perspective, from one more perspective, from an alternative perspective, she started identifying the action steps that she actually could or needed to take to start getting there. And this is one of the fascinating things about this little exercise, right? It can lead a person out of big picture vision thinking, which is kind of like how I live my life most of the time. Remember 2 videos ago I talked about how I relate with my business partner and friend Julian. I'm usually the big vision kind of guy and he's the detailed thinker kind of guy, and we just work really well together and we build great things. We get on absolutely fantastically. We complement each other. But to be honest with you, over the years, I've had to really change and become more flexible in my thinking. Sometimes I would leave a conversation with Julian being absolutely exhausted, and I'm pretty sure he left a conversation with me being absolutely exhausted. Why? Because he wants to know the details, right? But I just want to express and talk about the vision, the big picture. Big or small. All right, so coming to see eye to eye with people, coming to understand people's perspective is really about us developing this cognitive flexibility, about thinking and looking at life and circumstances and in different ways and from different angles. Now, we can also use this if we have some people who, say for example, are more visually inclined. So inside of their mind, we understand there's a term called representational systems, right? How it is that we internally represent our external experiences, all right? So, say for example, we all have memories, don't we? If I was to ask you to think about or focus on a really traumatic past life event, and close your eyes, and then you start doing this, you're either going to be focusing on a picture or an image that you have in your mind, which will mean that you're therefore then quite a visual thinker, or you might just be replaying a dialogue that happened back then, or your interpretation of the dialogue that happened back then, which might mean that you're more of an audio kind of style thinker, or you might be more kinesthetic, where you just immersed in experience and, it was, my goodness, it made me feel like this, it made me feel like that. Right? So what I'm saying is this shift in perspective model can be massively powerful to get people out of their default representational style, if that makes sense. And we can do this if we know a person is more visually inclined. We can ask them, so tell me, what is it you're hearing here? What might be being said? What are the details? Visual can sometimes be big picture, whereas auditory might be more specifics and more details. So what I'm saying, you just got to play around with this stuff. Another great example, very, very simple, shifting from the positive to the negative or from the negative to the positive. Now, most people would say, well, it's important that we're always driving a person out of the negative and into the positive, but sometimes not. Sometimes it's going to be useful, especially if a person is off the Superman complex. Remember that idea from earlier on in this section? If a person operates from the Superman complex, the Superman mindset, they might be thinking, yes, I can do everything that I turn my hand to, and they'll be living in this idealistic way of thinking where everything's possible, everything's achievable, and they might not be too overly realistic in identifying possible pitfalls or hurdles or challenges or obstacles that might come their way. And this is where it's not like we want to turn positive thinkers into negative thinkers, but we want to be balanced thinkers, which means that, yes, it's great to have goals and visions and dreams and ambitions, but we want to be aware of the potential hurdles and challenges and obstacles that we might encounter along the way. Why? So that we are prepared. All right, let us not expect life to be plain sailing. Let us sometimes prepare for the worst case scenario. Remember, it's not what we find in life that disappoints us the most. It's 9 times out of 10 our expectations not being met. And I've worked with many people who operate from this Superman complex who end up completely disheartened, disillusioned in life, depressed, doom and gloom. Why? Because they end up beating themselves up when they weren't able to or didn't know how to or hadn't learned a strategy for working through a certain stage or process within their lives. So again, this flips both ways. Again, we use this shifting perspective model. And what might you see if you were to look at this from an alternative perspective? Some people just live their lives future focused. Some people spend most of their lives living in the past. Well, if you were to look at this from an alternative perspective at some point in the future, how might this feel or seem? If you were to look at how you're feeling right now and compare this to some experience you've had in the past, what might change? And the ironic thing is there's no such thing as a silly question, all right? It's just playing. Remember, once a person's in this place of reflection, it doesn't really matter what questions you ask. And I'm actually being serious here. Why? Because as human beings, we're meaning-making machines. I mean, what questions did I ask Karen? Was there any intent, any agenda behind my questions? No, there wasn't. I was just playing with her. That's what I was doing. I was asking questions. Karen was doing all the work herself. It was ultimately Karen who determined where she went inside of her mind, what it was that she went on to cognitively process. All right, this is a fantastic thing about the mind. Anything the mind can do, the mind can undo. All right, it just becomes easier for the mind to undo some of the things that it does when we become more cognitively flexible. You with me? So, just a few further distinctions I wanted to share with you before we move on, and that's it. I will look forward to seeing you again in the next clip.